Rain fell relentlessly on Oak Grove Cemetery in Boston, forming puddles that reflected the grey sky like dark mirrors. Alexander Mitchell, in his impeccable suit and black umbrella, walked along the familiar path that led to Sarah's grave, his wife who had passed away 23 years ago. His steps, steady despite his 65 years, echoed against the wet pavement as he held a bouquet of white gardenias, her favorites. As he had done every Thursday for more than 2 decades, Alexander stopped in front of the marble headstone that read Sarah Thompson Mitchell, 1960-2000, beloved wife and eternal angel. His fingers traced the engraved letters, a gesture that had become ritual, while his dark eyes lost themselves in memories. "Another Thursday, my love," he murmured, placing the flowers next to the framed photograph that adorned the headstone. "The company keeps growing. We just opened our 5th branch in Seattle. You always said we'd go far, didn't you?" The sound of a child crying interrupted his monologue. A few meters away, a young woman struggled to maintain her balance while carrying a small child who was crying inconsolably. Another child, barely older, clung to her wet skirt. The scene immediately caught Alexander's attention as he watched the woman try to calm the little one while searching for something in her worn purse. Without thinking twice, Alexander approached them, extending his umbrella to protect them from the rain. "Do you need help, ma'am?" he asked in a soft voice. The woman looked up, revealing honey-colored eyes that for a moment painfully reminded him of Sarah. Thank you," she responded with a trembling voice. "Luke is hungry, but I forgot his bottle at home, and Matthew also needs something to eat." Alexander noticed the dark circles under her eyes, her modest but clean clothes, and the dignity with which she tried to maintain her composure despite the circumstances. "My name is Alexander Mitchell," he introduced himself. "Please let me help you. There's a coffee shop near here where we can take shelter from the rain." The woman hesitated for a moment, but Luke's crying intensified. "I'm Emily," she finally responded. "Emily Parker, and these are my children, Luke and Matthew." At the coffee shop, while the children ate sandwiches and drank hot chocolate, Emily explained that she had lost her job as a secretary 3 months ago, and things had been difficult since then. Her husband had abandoned them shortly after Luke's birth, leaving her alone with 2 small children. Alexander listened attentively, recognizing in her a strength similar to what he had admired in Sarah. Unable to help himself, he took out his checkbook and wrote a generous amount. "This is so you can feed your children while you find a new job," he said, handing her the check. "And if you'll allow me, I can make some calls. I have contacts in several companies." Emily looked at the check with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, this is too much. I can't accept it." "Please, I insist," Alexander responded with a kind smile. "Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better. You can return it when your situation improves." What Alexander couldn't imagine was that this casual encounter in the rain would change his life forever. The next day, when he returned to the cemetery for his 2nd weekly visit, Thursdays and Sundays were sacred, he encountered a scene that left him paralyzed. Emily was kneeling in front of Sarah's grave, crying silently while caressing the photograph with a familiarity that disconcerted him. "Emily!" His voice sounded harsher than he intended. "What are you doing here?" She startled, quickly standing up while wiping away her tears. "Mr. Mitchell, I wasn't expecting to find you here." "This is my wife's grave," said Alexander, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. "Did you know her?" Emily seemed to struggle with herself before responding. "No, not directly," she whispered. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." The wind blew between the headstones, moving the tree leaves and creating dancing shadows on the marble. Alexander felt the world beginning to spin more slowly while he waited for Emily's words, words that he was sure would change everything he thought he knew about his life with Sarah. Emily took a deep breath before speaking, her hands trembling as she pulled a yellowed envelope from her purse. 6 months ago, my adoptive mother passed away, she began. Among her belongings, I found these documents. They're my adoption papers. Alexander remained silent, watching as Emily carefully unfolded the documents. His heart was beating strongly, as if anticipating what was to come. My biological mother... Emily paused, her voice breaking slightly. My biological mother was Sarah Thompson. The world seemed to stop around Alexander. Emily's words echoed in his ears like a distant echo, while his eyes fixed on the date on the document, 1995, 5 years before Sarah's death. "This isn't possible," muttered Alexander, taking the papers with trembling hands. "Sarah and I, we never had children. It was before," Emily explained. The wind blew between the headstones, moving the tree leaves and creating dancing shadows on the marble. Alexander felt the world beginning to spin more slowly while he waited for Emily's words. Words that he was sure would change everything he thought he knew about his life with Sarah. Emily took a deep breath before speaking, her hands trembling as she pulled a yellowed envelope from her purse. "6 months ago, my adoptive mother passed away," she began. "Among her belongings, I found these documents. They're my adoption papers." Alexander remained silent, watching as Emily carefully unfolded the documents. His heart was beating strongly, as if anticipating what was to come. "My biological mother," Emily paused, her voice breaking slightly. "My biological mother was Sarah Thompson." The world seemed to stop around Alexander. Emily's words echoed in his ears like a distant echo, while his eyes fixed on the document's date, 1995, 5 years before Sarah's death. "This isn't possible," muttered Alexander, taking the papers with trembling hands. "Sarah and I, we never had children. It was before," Emily explained softly, "before she met you. My biological father is Nathan Harris." The name fell like lightning upon Alexander. Nathan Harris, Sarah's best friend during her youth, who had mysteriously disappeared from their lives shortly before he and Sarah began their relationship. Nathan. Alexander's voice sounded strange even to himself. "The same Nathan who—" "Yes," Emily confirmed. "I've been investigating for months. After finding these documents, I searched through old photographs, records. Everything led me here, to her, to you." Alexander sat on a nearby bench, feeling his legs could no longer support him. 23 years of cemetery visits, of one-sided conversations with a cold headstone, of memories he thought were perfect. And now, how much more didn't he know about the woman he had loved? "Why did you decide to look for me now?" he finally asked. Emily sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. "It wasn't my intention. Yesterday's encounter was a coincidence or maybe fate. I've been coming here for weeks, trying to find the courage to approach your house, to talk to you. But when I saw you yesterday, when you were so kind to my children and me, I knew I couldn't keep this secret anymore." Alexander closed his eyes, remembering every moment with Sarah, looking for signs he might have missed. Had he ever noticed a lingering look, an unexplained silence, an inexplicable sadness in her eyes? "There's more," said Emily, pulling another envelope from her purse. "I found these letters. Sarah, my mother, wrote them for me, but never sent them. I think you should read them too." With trembling hands, Alexander took the second envelope. Inside were several letters, all written in Sarah's elegant and familiar handwriting. He began to read the first one. "My dearest daughter, each passing day, I carry the weight of not being able to hold you, of not being able to watch you grow. Your father, Nathan, never knew of your existence, and that's a secret that torments me as much as having let you go. When I met Alexander, I found a different love, mature, that gave me the stability I needed. But you, my little one, have always been in my thoughts." The words became blurry as tears clouded his vision. Alexander carefully folded the letter, unable to continue reading at that moment. "I need time," he finally said. "I need to process all of this." Emily nodded understandingly. "I understand. Here's my phone number," she said, handing him a card. "When you're ready to talk, when you want to know more, I'll be waiting." As he watched Emily walk away along the cemetery path, Alexander turned towards Sarah's grave. The photograph he had looked at for so many years seemed different now, as if his wife's eyes held secrets he was just beginning to discover. That night, in the solitude of his study, Alexander pulled out an old memory box he kept in his closet. Among yellowed photographs and love letters, he found an image he had forgotten. Sarah and Nathan, young and smiling, at what appeared to be a college party. The date on the back, 1994, 1 year before Emily's birth. With trembling hands, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in decades. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered, "Hello?" "Nathan," said Alexander, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "This is Alexander Mitchell. We need to talk about Sarah and about Emily." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The old coffee shop in downtown Boston seemed frozen in time, with its worn wooden tables and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Alexander arrived first, choosing a secluded table by the window. His fingers drummed nervously on the surface while he waited, Sarah's letters stored in the inner pocket of his jacket, like a weight constantly reminding him of his purpose. When Nathan entered the establishment, Alexander could barely recognize him. The years hadn't been kind to his former friend. His once jet-black hair was completely grey, and his figure, once athletic, was consumed by the illness Emily had mentioned. "Alexander," Nathan greeted, sitting down with difficulty. "It's been many years, 25 to be exact," Alexander responded, carefully observing the man before him. "Since you disappeared without explanation." An uncomfortable silence settled between them as the waiter served them coffee. Nathan took a sip, as if seeking strength in the hot beverage. "I assume you've met Emily," Nathan finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you know?" Alexander asked, trying to control the anger beginning to rise within him. "All this time, did you know you had a daughter with Sarah?" Nathan shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I found out just 3 months ago when Emily found me. It was like a ghost from the past coming back to settle accounts." Alexander pulled out the letters and placed them on the table. "Sarah wrote these letters. She never sent them, but they explain some things." "Have you read them all?" Nathan asked. "No, just the first one. I haven't had the courage to continue." Nathan nodded understandingly. "I haven't been able to read the ones Emily showed me either. It's too painful." "What really happened between you and Sarah, Nathan? Why did Sarah never tell me about this?" The older man sighed deeply before beginning his story. "Sarah and I met in college. It was an intense, passionate love, but also immature. When she discovered she was pregnant, I was about to leave for England with a scholarship. She never told me. And you just left like that?" Disbelief colored Alexander's voice. "I left because she asked me to," Nathan responded bitterly. "She told me she needed time, that we should separate. I respected her decision, thinking it was best for both of us. I never imagined—" His words were interrupted by a coughing fit. Alexander noticed how his hands trembled as he brought the cup to his lips. "What's wrong with you, Nathan?" Alexander asked, his initial anger giving way to concern. "Terminal cancer," Nathan responded with a sad smile. "The doctors give me 6 months, maximum. That's why, when Emily appeared in my life, I felt it was a second chance, an opportunity to make things right before—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Alexander felt his world transforming again. The image of Sarah, which he had kept intact for so many years, was fading to give way to a more complex, more human reality. "There's something else you should know," Nathan continued, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "I found these photographs among my things. They're of Sarah and me, but there's one in particular you should see." Alexander took the photograph Nathan held out. In it, Sarah smiled at the camera, holding a small bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Her eyes shone with a mixture of love and sadness that broke his heart. "It's the only photo that exists of Sarah with Emily," Nathan explained. "I took it the day she gave her up for adoption. She didn't know I was there, that I had followed her to the hospital. I didn't have the courage to approach her, to confront her, and that has been my biggest regret." Nathan's words resonated in the silence of the coffee shop. Alexander contemplated the photograph, recognizing in Sarah's face a vulnerability he had never seen during their marriage. "Why are you telling me all this now?" he finally asked. "Because Emily and her children need a family," Nathan responded with sincerity. "I won't be here much longer, and you're the closest thing to a father that Sarah would have wanted for her." That night, after the meeting with Nathan, Alexander locked himself in his study. Sarah's letters lay on his mahogany desk, illuminated by the soft lamplight. With a glass of whiskey in hand, he finally found the courage to continue reading. My dear Emily, today you turn 5, though I can't celebrate it with you. I wonder if you're happy, if you have a family that loves you as much as I would have. Alexander and I have been married for 3 years now, and each passing day, the weight of my secret grows heavier. I love him deeply, but I fear that if he discovers the truth, everything we've built will crumble. Alexander took a long drink before continuing with the next letter. My little one, last night I had a dream where I saw you running through the garden, your black hair waving in the wind, just like your father's. Nathan never knew about you, and that's another weight I carry in my conscience. I saw him yesterday from afar in a coffee shop. He's visiting Boston and seems happy. I wonder if I should tell him the truth. But with what right at Chaz after so many years? The letters continued, each revealing more layers of the woman he thought he knew perfectly. Sarah wrote about her fears, her hopes, her love for Alexander, and the constant pain of her secret. In a particularly emotional letter, she explained her decision. Dear daughter, today I need to explain why I made the hardest decision of my life. When I found out I was pregnant, I was young and scared. Nathan was about to leave for England, and I didn't want to be an obstacle in his path. But more than that, I didn't feel ready to be a mother. My parents, so traditional and strict, would never have accepted a pregnancy out of wedlock. Adoption seemed like the only way out that would give you a chance to have a full life, with a family that could offer you everything I couldn't at that moment. When I met Alexander, I found in him a stability and love that helped me heal. But never, not a single day, have I stopped thinking about you. Every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment, I wonder what you would be like, what you would be doing. Forgive me for my cowardice, for not looking for you, for not telling the truth to the people I love. Alexander's hands trembled as he read the last letter, dated just days before the accident that took Sarah's life. My beloved Emily, I sense that time is running out. I can't explain it, but something in my heart tells me I must leave this testimony. Alexander has been the best husband I could have wished for, and my greatest remorse is not having told him the truth about you. He has an enormous heart, and I know he would have loved you as his own daughter. If you ever find these letters, if you ever meet Alexander, please forgive us both, me for not having the courage to raise you, and him for keeping him in ignorance of your existence. I love you eternally, Sarah. Tears ran freely down Alexander's face as he folded the last letter. All these years he had kept Sarah on a pedestal, idealizing her as the perfect wife. Now, discovering her fears, her doubts, and her remorse, he loved her even more. She was more real, more human, more complete in her imperfection. He took his phone and, with trembling fingers, dialed Emily's number. Mr. Mitchell, she answered on the third ring. Emily, could you come to my house tomorrow, with the children? I think it's time you learn the complete story of your mother, and that I get to know my family better. The silence on the other end of the line was broken by a contained sob. Yes, she finally responded. Yes, we'd love that. Alexander's mansion in Beacon Hill had never seemed so alive as on that Sunday morning. Matthew and Luke's laughter echoed through the hallways as they chased Bailey, the old golden retriever Alexander had adopted years ago to combat his loneliness. Alexander's mansion in Beacon Hill had never seemed so alive as on that Sunday morning. Matthew and Luke's laughter echoed through the hallways as they chased Bailey, the old golden retriever Alexander had adopted years ago to combat his loneliness. Emily observed the scene from the living room sofa, holding a cup of tea between her hands. Alexander had arranged several photo albums and a box of Sarah's memories on the coffee table. She adored this garden, Alexander commented, pointing to the windows that led to the backyard. She spent hours tending to the roses. She always said each flower had its own personality. Emily smiled softly. I love gardening too. My adoptive mother used to say it was a natural gift. Maybe you inherited it from her, Alexander responded, opening one of the albums. Look, these photos are from when Sarah was young, before we met. The album's pages revealed a radiant Sarah with black hair falling in waves over her shoulders and a smile that illuminated every photograph. Emily leaned in to look closer, recognizing in those features some of her own. "I have her eyes," Emily murmured, gently touching one of the photographs. "And her smile," Alexander added. "The first time I saw you in the cemetery, something about you reminded me of her. Now I understand why." A crash from the kitchen interrupted their conversation. Luke appeared in the doorway, his face covered in flour and a guilty expression. "Luke!" Emily exclaimed. Standing up. "What did you do?" "I wanted to make cookies like in the photo," explained the little boy, pointing to a photograph where Sarah appeared baking in the kitchen. Alexander let out a laugh, his first genuine one in a long time. "Your grandmother Sarah was famous for her chocolate cookies. How about I teach you the recipe?" Luke's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we, Mum?" Emily nodded, moved by how naturally Alexander had used the word grandmother. The afternoon passed between flour, chocolate, and laughter. Matthew proved to be especially skilled at decorating cookies, while Luke insisted on tasting the raw dough at every opportunity. While the cookies were baking, Alexander brought out a small velvet box from his study. "This belonged to Sarah," he said, handing it to Emily. "She kept it all her life. And I think now it should be yours." Inside the box was a delicate gold locket. Upon opening it, Emily found a tiny photograph of Sarah holding a baby, herself on the day of her birth. "I never understood why Sarah insisted so much on keeping this locket," Alexander confessed. "Now it all makes sense." Emily couldn't contain her tears as she held the locket. "All my life I wondered if my biological mother ever thought about me. If she loved me." "She loved you every day of her life," Alexander responded firmly. "Those letters are testimony to that. And although I can't change the past, I can try to honor her memory by being part of your life and your children's, if you'll allow it." The oven timer rang at that moment, and Luke ran excitedly toward the kitchen. "The cookies are ready, Grandpa." The word floated in the air, natural and sincere, making both Alexander and Emily hold their breath for a moment. Then, almost simultaneously, they smiled. "We better go before he decides to take them out himself," said Alexander, standing and extending his hand to Emily. "Coming, daughter?" Emily took his hand, feeling something heal inside her. "Yes, Dad." As they walked to the kitchen, where the children were already planning their next culinary adventure, Alexander looked at Sarah's portrait that presided over the living room. For the first time in years, he felt that her smile in the photograph held no secrets, but rather shone with approval and love. A week after the cookie afternoon, Alexander received an urgent call from the hospital. Nathan had been admitted for emergency care, and his condition was deteriorating rapidly. Without hesitation, he contacted Emily, and together they headed to Massachusetts General Hospital. The oncology ward hallway seemed endless as they walked toward room 507. Emily squeezed Alexander's hand, seeking strength in this man who, in such a short time, had gone from being a stranger to becoming a fundamental pillar in her life. Nathan lay in the hospital bed, connected to several monitors. His emaciated face lit up when he saw them enter together. "My two families," he whispered weakly. "What a gift to see you like this." Emily approached the bed, taking her biological father's hand. "Why didn't you tell us earlier that you were getting worse?" "I didn't want to worry you," Nathan responded, trying to sit up. "Besides, I needed to finish something important." With difficulty, he pointed to a briefcase in the corner of the room. Alexander retrieved it and placed it on the bed. "There's a journal inside," Nathan explained. "I started writing it the day I found out about your existence, Emily. It's my way of leaving a record of everything I never got to tell you, of explaining who I am, who I was." With trembling hands, Emily opened the briefcase and pulled out a worn leather notebook. As she opened it, a photograph slipped between its pages. Sarah and Nathan, young and in love, at what appeared to be a picnic. "That day," said Nathan with a nostalgic smile, "was when I told Sarah about winning the scholarship to England. She encouraged me to accept it, to chase my dreams. I never imagined she carried within her the greatest treasure life could have given me." Alexander observed the scene in silence, feeling a mix of contradictory emotions. On one hand, the pain of imagining Sarah in another man's arms. On the other, gratitude toward Nathan for having given life to Emily, who now filled his days with light. "There's something else," Nathan continued, pulling an envelope from under his pillow. "These are the papers for my apartment in Beacon Hill and my savings. Everything is in your name, Emily. It's the least I can do after so many years of absence." "No, Dad," Emily protested, tears running down her cheeks. "I don't need any of that. I just need time with you, for you to know your grandchildren." "Time is precisely what I don't have, my girl," Nathan responded with a sad smile. "But these last months have been a gift. Seeing you become the extraordinary woman you are, meeting my grandchildren, making peace with the past." A coughing fit interrupted his words. When it calmed, he looked directly at Alexander. "Alexander, my friend," he said weakly. "Forgive me for not being honest with you all these years. Sarah chose you because she saw in you what I could never be. A man of integrity, capable of loving unconditionally." "There's nothing to forgive," Alexander responded, approaching the bed. "We all made mistakes. We all kept secrets. What matters is now." Nathan nodded, closing his eyes for a moment. "Emily," he murmured, "in the journal you'll find all the answers you're looking for. And also, there are letters for Matthew and Luke, for when they're older." The heart monitor began emitting slower beeps. A nurse rushed into the room. "I need you to wait outside," she indicated with professional firmness. Before leaving, Emily leaned down and kissed Nathan's forehead. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "And I love you, my little one," he responded with a thread of voice. "I'll always be with you." In the hallway, Emily collapsed in Alexander's arms, who held her as she sobbed. The pages of Nathan's journal, pressed against her chest, held the last words of a man who, in his final days, had found redemption in the love of a daughter he never knew he had. 3 days after Nathan's funeral, Emily and Alexander sat in the study of the mansion to read the journal together. The children slept in the guest room, which had gradually become their permanent space during increasingly frequent visits. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked softly, serving 2 cups of tea. Emily nodded, opening the journal to the first page. Nathan's handwriting, though shaky from illness, was clear and determined. "Dear Emily, when I learned of your existence, madam, the world I had built collapsed like a house of cards. 25 years of self-deception vanished in an instant. Let me tell you the true story of your mother and me, a story I never had the courage to share with anyone." The pages revealed a story of young love, shared dreams, and hasty decisions. Nathan described how he met Sarah in architecture school, their passionate romance, and the plans they made for the future. "Your mother was pure light," he wrote. "She had a way of seeing the world that made everything seem possible. When I won the scholarship to England, she was the first to celebrate, though now I know she already carried our greatest secret within her." Emily read aloud, her voice breaking occasionally. Alexander listened in silence, each word revealing a new facet of the woman he had loved. "The day I left for England," the journal continued, "I saw something different in her eyes, but I was too excited about my future to pay attention. That was my first big mistake. The second was not returning when she stopped responding to my letters. I convinced myself it was better that way, that she deserved someone more stable, more mature. I never imagined." The following pages contained reflections on the lost years, photographs Nathan had kept, and newspaper clippings mentioning Sarah's professional achievements. "When I learned of her marriage to Alexander," he wrote, "I felt a mixture of pain and relief. He was everything I hadn't been able to be: responsible, dedicated, a man who could offer her the stability she deserved. I saw them once from afar at an art exhibition. They looked happy, complete. I decided it was better to keep my distance, not knowing that in doing so, I was also distancing myself from you." Emily stopped, looking at Alexander. "Do you remember that exhibition?" "The Gardner Museum, 1997, Alexander responded, nodding. Sarah was radiant that night. She won her first Architectural Design Award. They continued reading. The journal took a more personal turn when Nathan described the moment Emily found him. "When you appeared in my office, it was like seeing Sarah again. You have her eyes, Her way of moving your hands when you talk her laugh. Cancer had already consumed much of my strength, but seeing you gave me a new purpose. I needed to make sure you knew the truth, that you were the product of love, even though circumstances separated us. The last pages contained advice for Emily, stories about Nathan's family, and cultural heritage details he wanted her to know. There was also a section dedicated to his grandchildren, for Matthew and Luke, my little warriors. Although I won't be able to see you grow up, I want you to know that your grandfather loved you from the first moment. Matthew, your curiosity reminds me of myself at your age. Luke, your smile is identical to your mother's when she was little, though I couldn't see it then. I recognize it in photos from her adoptive family. The final entry, written in almost illegible handwriting, was dated 2 days before his death. My dear Emily, in the end I understand that life has its own way of closing circles. I lost you once, but I got you back just in time to depart in peace. Take care of your children, allow Alexander to be the father I couldn't be, and above all, forgive. Forgive us all for the secrets, the hasty decisions, the silences. Love, though imperfect, always finds its way. With eternal love, Nathan. Emily closed the journal, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Alexander hugged her in silence, feeling another wall between them crumble. Autumn had arrived in Boston, tinting the gardens of the Mitchell mansion golden. Emily had decided to temporarily move with her children into one of the guest rooms while they renovated the apartment inherited from Nathan. What began as a temporary solution had become a routine that none of them wanted to break. One afternoon, while Matthew was doing his homework in the study and Luke played in the garden, Alexander found Emily in the attic, surrounded by old boxes. "What are you doing up here?" he asked, sitting beside her on the dusty floor. "I found these boxes marked with Sarah's name," Emily responded, showing him a blue silk dress. This was hers, wasn't it? Alexander took the garment carefully, memories flooding his mind. She wore it on our first formal date. It was her favorite color. "Mine too," smiled Emily, caressing the fabric. "It's curious how many things we share without knowing it." As they explored the boxes, they discovered more treasures: architectural sketchbooks, family photographs, and a small music box that still worked. "This melody," Emily murmured, listening to the soft notes. "My adoptive mother had the same one. She used to put me to sleep with it when I was little." "Sarah bought it on a trip to Vienna," explained Alexander. "She said someday she would give it to her daughter." His voice broke as he understood the hidden meaning of those words spoken so many years ago. Emily closed the music box and looked directly at Alexander. "Do you think she would be happy with this? With us trying to be a family? I'm sure this is exactly what she would have wanted," Alexander responded with conviction. "You know, I've been thinking, Nathan's apartment is beautiful, but this house has too much space for one man alone. Maybe you could stay here permanently." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? The children can be quite noisy." "This place needs noise, laughter, life," smiled Alexander. "Besides, Matthew has already claimed the study as his homework space, and Luke, well, I think Bailey wouldn't survive if they took away his playmate." At that moment, as if he had heard his name, Luke appeared in the attic entrance, his face smudged with dirt and a mischievous smile. "Grandpa, look what I found in the garden," he exclaimed, showing an old rusty key. Alexander recognized it immediately. "That's the key to the greenhouse," he said, surprised. "It's been closed since Sarah. Can we open it?" asked Luke, his eyes shining with excitement. The three of them went down to the garden where the old greenhouse stood, covered in vines. The key turned with difficulty in the rusty lock, but finally the door opened with a creak. The interior was dusty and abandoned, but you could still see the structures where Sarah used to grow her beloved orchids. In a corner, a small work table contained a gardening notebook, miraculously preserved by time. "These are her gardening notes," whispered Emily, leafing through the notebook. "Look, she even drew each flower she planted." "We could restore it," suggested Alexander. "Make this place special again." "I want to help," exclaimed Luke. "We can plant more flowers and maybe some tomatoes." Emily laughed, hugging her son. "I think your grandmother Sarah would have loved that idea." Matthew, who had joined them quietly, observed everything with his curious eyes. "Mom, can we hang Grandpa Nathan's photo here next to Grandma Sarah's?" "Of course we can, sweetheart," responded Emily, looking at Alexander for approval. "This is a place for our entire family," he nodded, past and present. As the afternoon sun filtered through the dirty greenhouse glass, the four began making plans for its restoration. It was as if Sarah had kept this space especially for this moment, for when her family would finally be complete. 6 months had passed since the greenhouse opening. Spring had arrived, and with it, the once abandoned space had transformed into a garden full of life. Emily had inherited not only Sarah's eyes, but also her gift for gardening. The orchids bloomed again, accompanied by the cherry tomatoes that Luke had insisted on planting. One Saturday morning, while Emily was watering the plants, she found something unusual behind an old pot, a small metal box partially buried in the soil. "Dad," she called to Alexander, who had grown accustomed to her calling him that. "Come see this." Alexander left his coffee cup on the work table and approached. The box was rusted but intact, with the initials ST engraved on the lid. "I've never seen this before," murmured Alexander, taking the box carefully. Together, they opened it to find a set of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon and a small leather notebook. "These are different from the other letters," noticed Emily, untying the bow delicately. The first letter was dated 1 week before Sarah's accident. "Dear Alexander and Emily, if you're reading this together, it means the truth has finally come to light. I've kept this box here, in my favorite place, waiting for the day when my 2 greatest loves might find it. Alexander, my eternal love, forgive me for not having the courage to tell you about Emily. Every time I tried to do it, fear paralyzed me. It wasn't fear of your reaction, but of facing my own past decisions. You gave me such pure, unconditional love that I feared tarnishing it with my secrets. Emily, my little one, I write this without knowing if you'll ever read it. I looked for you, every year, on your birthday. I would go to the orphanage where I left you, just to know that you had been adopted by a good family. I consoled myself thinking you were happy, that you had the home I couldn't give you then. There's something else you need to know." Emily paused, her voice trembling. Alexander took her hand, giving her strength to continue. "I've been having dreams, premonitions perhaps. I feel my time is growing short, and I need to leave this written. In the notebook, you'll find the true story, the whole truth about why I made the decisions I made. I love you both more than my own life, and my greatest wish is that someday you might be together, be the family we should have always been. With eternal love, Sarah." With trembling hands, they opened the notebook. The pages revealed a deeper story than they had imagined. Sarah wrote about her youth, her love for Nathan, but also about a hereditary illness that tormented her. "I decided to give Emily up for adoption, not only because of the circumstances," she wrote, "but because doctors had diagnosed me with a heart condition that could be hereditary. I didn't want to condemn my daughter to live with that fear. Years later, when doctors confirmed the condition wasn't as serious as they thought, it was too late to get her back." Emily and Alexander looked at each other, finally understanding the weight Sarah had carried. "Wait," Emily said suddenly. "If she had a heart condition, the accident?" Alexander nodded slowly. "The medical report mentioned she probably had a heart attack while driving. She never told me she was ill." "There's more," whispered Emily, pointing to the last pages of the notebook. "I've been saving money in a special account," Sarah wrote, "for Emily and her future children. Alexander, there's a safety deposit box at the bank with all the documents. The key is at the bottom of this box. I want this money to help secure the future of our family, the family I never got to see united." At the bottom of the metal box, just as the letter said, they found a small golden key. Luke, who had been playing nearby, approached when he saw tears in his mother's eyes. "Why are you crying, Mommy?" he asked, hugging her. "They're tears of joy, my love," Emily responded, pulling her son close. "Your grandmother Sarah left us a very special gift." "More special than my tomatoes?" the boy asked innocently, making everyone laugh. "Different," smiled Alexander, ruffling his grandson's hair. "She left us the most important gift of all, the truth. Exactly 1 year had passed since the discovery of the box in the greenhouse. The Mitchell mansion, once silent and solemn, now overflowed with life. The money Sarah had saved allowed Emily to open her own architecture studio, unconsciously following in her biological mother's footsteps. It was Sunday, and the family had gathered in the garden for a special occasion. The greenhouse, completely restored, shone under the afternoon sun. Sarah's orchids bloomed alongside Luke's tomatoes, creating a peculiar but beautiful combination that seemed to symbolize the fusion of their lives. Alexander observed from his favorite chair while Matthew, now 10 years old, read aloud a composition he had written for school. My Extraordinary Family, by Matthew Parker Mitchell. I have 2 grandparents I never met in person, but who are always present. My grandmother Sarah, who loved flowers and kept secrets in her heart, and my grandfather Nathan, who wrote a journal so we could know him. I have a grandpa Alexander, who taught us that love can build bridges across any distance. Emily, sitting next to Alexander, squeezed his hand as they listened. Luke, now 7, played with Bailey while paying intermittent attention to his brother's words. And I have a mom who's an architect like my grandmother Sarah, and who taught us that families are like gardens. They grow in unexpected ways, but always toward the light. Alexander rose slowly, leaning on his cane. The years didn't pass in vain, but his eyes maintained the sparkle of someone who had found a new reason to live. I have something to show you, he announced, heading toward the greenhouse. In the center of the space, he had installed a special display case. Inside, Sarah and Nathan's letters were carefully preserved, along with photographs of both. A new frame contained a recent photo of the entire family, taken at Luke's last birthday. This is our family tree, explained Alexander, revealing a beautiful mural he had been covering, not just of blood, but of love. The mural, painted by a local artist, showed a tree whose intertwined roots represented Sarah and Nathan. The branches extended upward, including Alexander, Emily, her children, and even Emily's adoptive parents, creating an image of unity and continuity. There's something else, said Emily, pulling an envelope from her purse. I received the results of the heart tests. I'm fine, and so are the children. Mum's condition wasn't hereditary after all. Alexander hugged her tightly, tears rolling down his cheeks. Sarah would be so happy to know this. Look, exclaimed Luke suddenly, pointing to one of the orchids. It's blue! They all approached to see the flower that had caught his attention. It was a rare orchid, the exact shade of blue as the dress Sarah had worn on her first date with Alexander. It's a message, whispered Emily, gently caressing the petals. She's here with us. Matthew approached with his notebook. Can I finish reading my composition? Everyone nodded, forming a circle around the boy. And so our family is like this greenhouse, a place where past and present meet, where secrets transform into truths, and where love grows stronger than any flower. Some might say our story is complicated, but I think it's perfect because it's ours. Alexander looked around, at Emily, who had brought light back into his life, at Matthew with his precocious wisdom, at Luke with his contagious joy, at the flowers Sarah had loved so much, at the photographs that told their story. Everything had fallen into place, as if the universe had been patiently waiting for this moment. You know, he said, his voice soft but firm. Sarah always said there are no coincidences, only moments that were meant to happen. I think she was right. Emily smiled, hugging her children. We are the happy ending she always wanted for all of us. And so, in that greenhouse full of life and memories, the story that began with a secret ended with a truth greater than the sum of its parts, that love, in all its forms, has the power to heal, to unite, and to create miracles we can't even imagine.